Well, somehow it just seems to be appropriate to think of Tom backstage at a theater because he was such a man of the theater and a man of our theater. And we did more shows of Tom's than anyone else. And needless to say, we'll miss him. I think of him in all sorts of guises, backstage, on stage, with his impish smile and his ready wit and piercing insights. And beyond that, we'll just find other shows of his to do in the future, which will honor him the way we have. And I wish I could be there tonight, but Mufti rehearsals are calling, and I have to be there. So I wish you all well, but Tom and Janet, I miss you both.
You wonder how these things begin. Well, this begins with a glen, begins with a season, which, for want of a better word, we might as well call September. Begins with the forest where the woodchucks woo and leaves wax green and vines entwine like lovers. Try to see it, not with your eyes, for they are wise, but see it with your ears, the cool green breathing of the leaves, and hear it with the inside of your hand, the soundless sound of shadows flicking light. Celebrate sensation. Recall that secret place. You've been there. You remember. That special place where once, just once, in your crowded, sunlit lifetime, you hid away in shadows from the tyranny of time. That spot beside the clover where someone's hand held your hand, and love was sweeter than the berries or the honey or the stinging taste of mint.
Hello, Charles. How are you?
Hello, Richard. I'm good. That was such a beautiful video you put together.
Thank you. I am so thrilled that we are here tonight to celebrate the incredible legacy and body of worth, as I like to refer to it, of Tom Jones. About a month ago, I had the good fortune, thanks to his wonderful son, Sam, who we're going to meet in just a moment, to interview Tom. It was a great, great interview. Absolutely one of my favorites. He sent me an email. And he said, there are two obstacles. I'm deaf in both ears and I'm technologically challenged. If we can get past that, we'll do a great interview. We did get past that, thanks to Sam. And we're going to bring Sam on. And I'd like to thank you, Charles, because it was your idea that we get together tonight and that we celebrate him. We've got a few clips that we're going to share tonight. And we have a few very special people waiting in the wings. So thank you for helping put this together.
Yes, thank you. I can't wait to celebrate Tom tonight. He certainly deserves it. I had the good fortune of interviewing him too earlier in the pandemic. In fact, one of the first interviews that I did, I think, for my podcast. And it was very generous of him to grant me so much time. It ended up being, I think, 3 or 3.5 hours in total. And I felt very lucky to meet him.
He's absolutely the best. Sam, I want to say to you, first of all, when a person reaches a milestone age, like your dad did, and they pass on, I don't like to use the word die, because your father, thank God, will never die because of the legacy of the worth and the work that he left behind. And every single person, there are a lot of people who wanted to be here tonight who could not be here. I have never heard one person say one negative thing about your father. And that, to me, is his greatest legacy.
Well, that's very sweet. I think the video was lovely. It made me very emotional to hear. I haven't heard him do that recording in a while. I haven't heard that recording of him doing it in a while, and it's such a sort of wonderful. I think it's a great choice to kind of represent who Harvey was a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he reached so many milestones. You know what I mean? It was like 80 was a milestone, and then 85, and then 90, and then 95, and you almost started to be like, oh well, it's sort of Tom Jones springs eternal. But I think, and pass on. He left us in the way he wanted to leave, and so I think we're sort of my brother and I and all those around him. I think we're very grateful for that. Because, those can go a lot of different ways. And he was working, as you said, I mean, like up until we filmed videos that he wanted to get done for a new show called Geezers 2 days before he died. You know what I mean? So it was like really, and the work was so important to him and he cared so much about it. And I think it was such an integral part of like who he was and what his sort of life force was about. So the fact that he was able to kind of stay that connected to it till that late in the process, I think we're really grateful for.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charles. I'm sorry.
That is really beautiful. And I remember that from our interview that he was telling me, I'm still working on the Fantastics and fixing I Do, and just that he was able to keep working for so long. It's great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite is they did him and Andrew did a sort of reinvented the Tempest, and someone asked him about it recently. He said, well, there were a lot of problems in the original show. And we could really iron out the kinks. And I'm like, oh, of the Tempest. Great.
Right.
That's great. Yeah, I've always felt it needed work.
What really amazed me also, I mean, it was Albert Poland who reached out to me and told me, first of all, about the production that was going on in Provincetown of the Fantastics. And for those who don't know, it's a reimagining of the Fantastics. It's now a gay love story. And as your father said to me in our interview, when he was first approached to do this, I think the young man who reached out to him said, all we need to do is just change a few pronouns here or there. And your dad said, no. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. He was right in there working on this until the very end. I was in Provincetown. The show was sold out. I couldn't get tickets for it.
Oh, man, you should have called us. You got to connect. Out, we would have happily pulled a few strings on your back.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen it. But as with all of his work, it's not the end of the road. I mean, there are other productions that are in the work.
I hope so. I mean, I also didn't get to see it. I also would love to see it. I mean, I saw some videos of the production in Detroit, which was kind of the first iteration, I think it was in Detroit, in Michigan. And I think it's an awesome idea. I think it's so. And I do think it's amazing. And what he would say to me is how much it works, because I think there is something, and I think what is so sort of transcendent about that piece is it's so essential in so many of its elements. And that that they do such a good job of boiling things down to their essence, and not getting caught up in the trappings of whether it's staging, whether it's costumes, but all of those things are kind of distilled. And I think that's what gives the original piece so much power. And I think that totally shifts, that stuff has no boundaries as to kind of like boy, girl, boy, girl. I think all of that stuff really, it because of the simplicity, it can kind of transcend any of those other trappings.
Well,
right.
So this may sound like a silly question to ask, and I've asked other children who have been born into this business. When did you first become aware of your father's place in the world of theater?
Oh, I mean, I think before, I think very early is the simple answer. I mean, we would travel. Both my brother and I went to Japan with the Fantastics before we were 2 years old. And I mean, my father would tell a story of me doing my El Gallo makeup and the hat and reciting all the words to the Fantastics at 3 or something like that. And I think it's funny because it's a funny thing where to those who care, he's such a figure, but then to most people, they have no idea. You know what I mean? So it's like a funny kind of duality of like the sort of so well respected and so loved in one area, and then sort of to everyone else, it was like, oh, is he the singer, Tom Jones? And you're like, no. But yeah, I mean, he even told me, and we were very connected. I was sort of the firstborn son. I think we were very sort of tied together, which can often, I think, be the case. And, he said that at one point when I was like 4 years old, they were working on a show called Our Town, based on the book Our Town. Yeah, Grover's Corner is based on the book Our Town. And he said they were kind of doing it, and he comes back to me and he says, Sam, what do you think? And I said, it's the second act just isn't working, Dad. It's like clearly I'd heard someone say it or something, and I was like, very serious look on my face, and I was like, I just don't think we're getting it in the second act. And he was like, great, thanks. Everyone.
Well, we've got several people who are going to be coming out tonight. Before we bring on our next guest, and Charles, I'll let you decide who our next guest will be. I have a clip from Carol Demas, who I know is watching, but she unfortunately was not able to be here tonight. But she sent me a clip. Of course, she's done the Fantastics several times. She has a great story that I'll let her tell sometime. Charles, have you had Carol on your show?
No, I've never met her.
Got to make it happen. Carol, go on Charles's show and tell the story about her coming back to the Fantastics several years later. Sarah Rice, I don't want to get the story wrong, but Sarah Rice had to leave for throat surgery. And Tom called Carol and said, you have to come in and do the show. And Carol says, well, I'm a little older than Louisa. I don't think I should be doing this. But he convinced her to come into the show. Thank God she did. And she still has the right to sing this song. And I'm going to bring this clip on now. Stay on.
Talking about that, Eileen said to me, you should sing the girls' song, Louisa's first song, Much More. And I said, I haven't sung that since the 60s. Louisa is 16. Do you think that's appropriate? Really?
Sure. I said sure.
I said, because she's so full of hopes and dreams and fantasy. And then I thought, I'm in my 80s now. And when I look back at the things that Louisa said she wanted, I've been lucky. I've had some of those things. So maybe it's time to sing this song again, looking back at it. So here it is.
Thank you, Carol.
I like to swim in a clear blue stream where the water is icy cold, then go to town in a golden gown and have my fortune told. Just once, just once, just once before I'm old, I'd like to be not evil, but a little worldly wise, to be the kind of girl designed to be kissed upon the eyes. I'd like to dance till 2 o'clock, or sometimes dance till dawn, or if the band could stand it, just go on and on and on. Just once, before the chance is gone, I'd like to waste a week or two and never do a chore, to wear my hair unfastened so it belongs to the floor, to do the things I've dreamed about but never done before. Perhaps I'm bad or wild or mad, with lots of grief in store, but I want much more keeping house. Much more, much more, much more.
Bravo, bravo.
Carol D must just love her. And again, Charles, you got to get her on your show. We're going to make it happen. So,
Yes.
Charles, who would you like to bring on next?
Yes, well, next I'd love to bring on Nancy Ford Charles, who was a collaborator of Tom's on the musical The Game of Love, and who I believe played the piano for the Fantastics at one point.
I did. That was my second piano job in New York. And at the same time, my collaborator, Gretchen Cryer, was in 110 of the Shades. Same time I was playing the piano with the Fantastics. So Tom and Harvey knew us both, and they became mentors to us. In fact, they introduced us to their music publisher and their director, Word Baker, who directed three or four of our shows over the years later. They were so helpful. They worked with us on our backers auditions. They were the consummate backers audition performers. You know, I don't know if they were still having to do that after you were born, Sam. That was a long time. But did you ever see them do a backers audition of one of their shows?
I mean, I feel like that was my daily life for many years. Was
Oh, you did?
okay.
I mean,
one of his
you
shows.
know, it was as good as the show, better, maybe better than some of the shows, to see the two of them do it.
Yeah.
I so remember the early days of the Fantastics. Well, I played from 1960, I guess 3 through 4, somewhere in there. Of course, I met my husband while playing for the Fantastics. He was playing El Gallo, so that was fortuitous. That was also something I have to thank Tom and Harvey for. But what was I going to say about going back? Oh, okay, I've lost it. On to the next question. No.
Go ahead, Charles.
Well, so I'd love to ask you both, Nancy and Sam, now that you're both on, if you could talk a little bit about what his collaborative process was like from two different perspectives.
Well, I started collaborating with him on The Game of Love, as you mentioned, when he had a production of it somewhere down in, I think, at some theater in the East Village. And it had an orchestration to start with. At that time, it was called The Affairs of Anatole. And he asked my husband, Keith Charles, to play the role of Anatole in a production that was going to be done at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. And he asked if I would take the score and reduce it to piano and be the pianist. So the pianist was kind of a part of the show at that time. I had a nice black velvet gown on at the piano, and Anatole got to look over at me as though I was one of his conquests as well. Anyway, that was how I got started writing with Tom. And at the time, he needed 2 pieces of music that he had not found an Offenbach tune. I should say, I don't know if you said that before, but The Game of Love was mainly Offenbach's music to start with. And so he asked me if I would write a tune. We wrote a song that's still one of my favorite songs that I've ever written is Listen to the Rain. And we wrote that for Barbara Baxley. She had this wonderful kind of little girl voice, you know, and so we wrote that song with her voice in mind. I had played for her when she was in Brecht on Brecht at the Theatre de Lys a couple of years earlier, and so I knew what her voice was like. So then, I mean, he just gave me the lyrics because he had them all written out. You know, there was no... we didn't have very much back and forth on it, if you know what I mean. He wrote a full lyric, and the lyrics that he wrote were always set up so well in terms of how they felt rhythmically and everything. So really, I just had to find a melody. the form was all there, and then he, as you've been saying, he worked and reworked everything. He was always rewriting. And so over the years, the many years, because that first game of love called The Affairs of Anatole in Milwaukee was, I think, 1965. And over the years, he kept working on it. I think he might have finally finished it a couple of years ago. Do you, Sam? Because we were getting a new.
Yeah, he felt really good about it. I think he got it down to kind of a one act, and they did it at Mufti, and it was really great. Actually, I think it was one of my favorite.
Yeah, I love doing it. I played for it at the you're talking about the York Theater.
Yeah, at the York, yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to do. And
yeah.
So I think maybe he finally finished that show. But and eventually then there were 4 songs in it that I wrote the music for. And he was wonderful to work with because he was very supportive. I mean, I think he knew that I loved the lyrics he wrote, and he seemed to like the music I wrote for the lyrics. So we had a very pleasant relationship. I don't really remember any friction whatsoever.
That's amazing. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Sam,
What you were saying before about what legacy he leaves, he was such a good, kind person, and I will just never forget the way he handled your mom's illness, Sam, how good he was to her, and what a hard thing that must have been for him to go through. But I would say he was an eternal optimist, wasn't he? I mean, didn't he always have a really positive outlook toward everything? And in my experience with him, he seemed to be very upbeat and think things were going to.
Yeah, I think optimistic and anxious. It was sort of some combination of the two. You know, where it's sort of it's very an Upper West Side attitude, which is optimistic but also chronically, anxious. I think, ironically, just to answer the other question, I think that's probably different from his process with Harvey, which I think was almost always music first, and then he would write to the sort of Harvey would sort of. I think, he would describe it as the music would just sort of pour out of Harvey, and Harvey wasn't classically trained or, sort of like couldn't write music. So I think Harvey would record these demos, and I still have a ton of them on cassette. And, we're sort of starting to go through all that stuff and would just send them to my dad, and my dad would write to them. And I think that was how most of his stuff with Harvey went. So it's interesting and great, Nancy, to hear that went the other way. And it's such a beautiful song. I mean, listen to the rain again, and tomorrow we'll listen to the rain again. It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And its songs are filled with optimism. I have another clip. This clip comes to us from Jamie DeRoy, who also could not be here this evening. And she was telling me this is Jerry Orbach. And this was, I think, this was right after 9/11. And he literally came right off the set to do this number. So here he is, Jerry Orbach, on Jamie DeRoy's show.
Thanks, Jamie. Penny Fuller and I went to school together at Northwestern, and we go back a long, long way. For many, many, many years, I was in the musical theater, and for the last 9 years, I've been playing a New York policeman. And in those 9 years, I gained not only a respect and an admiration and love for the New York cop. I understood the difference between them and me. They're a lot tougher than I am, and they put on a gun in the morning, and they're not sure if they're going to come home at night. And a little while ago, a whole lot of them didn't come home. I just came here to say a few words and auction off a couple of things, but since Danny Rodriguez couldn't be here, I'm not going to sing the national anthem. But I'll sing you a little bit of what's sort of become my national anthem. And at this point in time, here on November 1st, yeah, it takes on a whole new meaning. Try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were a tender and callow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Try to remember when life was so tender that no one wept except the willow. Try to remember when life was so tender that dreams were kept beside your pillow. Try to remember when life was so tender that love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, without a hurt, the heart is hollow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember the fire of September that made us mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow. Follow. Thank you.
Jerry Orbach. Jerry.
That song gets me every time. Just unbelievable. Charles?
Everybody knows that song, and what you were saying about how they may not know Tom and Harvey. I live in Michigan now, and all these people, like, I'll mention somebody, Sheldon Harnick, and people look at me blankly, and yet they would go to see Fiddler on the Roof. Harvey. I mean, they know the names of the shows, but they don't know the names of the people who wrote them. Try to Remember is such a favorite with people. I live in a retirement center now, a retirement village, and people here love Try to Remember, but it's a joke because a lot of us here can't quite remember the way we once used to.
Dad was always trying to pitch it at some sort of drug. He's like, there's a built-in sales gimmick here somewhere.
Yeah, and I'd forgotten what a beautiful voice Jerry Orbach had.
Oh, so good.
Best, the best. I love the story that your dad told about the song. I asked, when I interviewed him, I opened with Harry Belafonte and his version. And he said that was one of his favorite versions. Of course, Ed Ames had the huge hit with it. And I asked him if he remembered the first time that he heard it on the radio. And he said, I was in the Bahamas. I was lying on the beach, drinking a pina colada. And the song comes on. And I raised my glass and said, thank you for paying for this vacation. So, Charles, bring on our next guest.
Yes, well, I'd love to bring on next someone who starred in a few of Tom's musicals, Michael Glenn Smith, maybe most notably in the original cast of Celebration, which we see behind us on Broadway. So, Michael, thank you for being here.
Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So glad you made it tonight. What are some of your we've talked with both Nancy and Sam about his collaborative process. If you can talk about the process from actor to composers, and what that experience was like for you.
Well, I think the great thing about him was that he also directed the shows that I was in of his. And I think he was a wonderful director for actors. He really wanted to hear my feedback, and he listened to what I had to say. Now that's what's great, is he listened. And I think it was when we really got close was when we did Celebration, the revised version. I can't remember what year that was, 74, 75, I think. And I just felt that there was just so many things that we could talk about, and I could ask him questions. I know at the top of Act Two, the lines were something like, "The boy is changing," and he would come out, "The girl is changing," whatever, and I would say, "Well, what happened? What happened to make him change?" And he'd say, "Well, I don't know, but that's you put your finger right on it." And but we would talk things about it, and I don't know. I just love the fact that he listened to what I had to say. That was what was great. Most directors don't. They've got it, at least the ones that I've worked with. They've got it in their mind the way it ought to be, and you ought to just do it that way.
Right.
Now, how many shows did you do with Tom?
A total of 3: Celebration, and The Fantastics, and Philemon. And Philemon, I got to say, that was probably the most creative experience of my life, because we did that for such a long period of time, and there were so many different versions. Well, I think Tom started working on it while we were doing the Fantastic. I mean the Celebration, and I think I'd been away to do the National Company of 1776, and I came back, and they said, "Okay, we're doing a midnight showing of Philemon at Portfolio," and this was, I think it was Easter Sunday, and we started at midnight. And I think finally at 4 a.m. the final curtain came down. But it was a big show, and there were lots of people in it. David Cryer played the title role. It was Philemon then. Philemon, later it was changed to Colchian, but Philemon was a character who was not seen. But it was just, I felt like Philemon was just such a, and I think God played my part. It was that role, but it was my part. And I was a little jealous, I have to say, but I understood. I was out of town. I couldn't very well be out of town and do 2 shows at once. Then I was so honored that in 70, and then I think in Philemon, he did it again in 72, and he had cut everything down just to its essence. And I think it was only about 45 minutes long. And Chapman Roberts had played the character of the clown who becomes a saint, and Carol Demas was in it. And saw Carol Demas naked. Wow! I mean, she was so beautiful. Oh, I have
watching now. She's watching.
Well, Carol, what can I say? I think I already told her. I think the first time I saw her after that was, "Carol Demas, the last time I saw you, you were butt naked to the audience." But, she was so beautiful. She still is too.
She still is.
But that was exciting. And then when they were going to do it again a year later, and they had made it larger, and then Damon Evans played the part. And I think in that version, Keith was in that version. Keith played the captain, and Susie Watson played the girl in it. Anyway, so I felt like that was sort of a little reunion there. And then they wanted to do more work on it. And I think then they realized that they had made well, Damon was just so lovable and so sweet, and he had no place to go, because it was about this kind of sleazy character who becomes a saint, a sleaze who becomes a saint, from sleaze to saint. And Dick Latessa was just perfect. I mean, I think there was just something. He was a good actor, and he could. It was the right meeting of the right actor for the right role at the right time. And I don't know. I was thrilled. I kept thinking, God, I can't believe it. Well, I was surprised at the casting. I just thought I was too old. But nonetheless, I was delighted. And I thought, well, if I'm too old, they'll tell me. I'm not going to try to act young or anything like that. I mean, this is what you see is what you get. This is it. But it was just such an incredibly creative experience, and there were more rewrites with Philemon, especially the character that Leela Martin played, which wasn't in the original. And Leela was such I guess it still is, I assume, a great actor. I have such respect for her. She was trained, at the actor studio. She was really a fine actress, and I don't know, she was a joy to work with. Well, everything about Philemon I loved. I loved that whole experience was just great, and the way that they would, we'd have our tea time every day at rehearsals. I think about 4 o'clock, whatever. Everything would stop, and John Shack, they would lay out these cold cuts and cheese and wine, and we would just stop and have this little party, and then we'd go back to work, and everybody was refreshed and excited about it. I mean, it was a wonderful experience all the way around. I've never had an experience like that before or since. It was just a fabulously creative experience.
That's wonderful.
I'm sorry to have talked so long, but I get started on this.
No, not at all. And before we went on air, Michael, you were telling us a story about your resemblance to both Jones and Schmidt, and I wonder if you could repeat that for our viewing audience.
Well, I think it started with Celebration, but it continued over the years. Every time any of Harvey's relatives from Texas would come up, they would say, "You look just like Harvey when he was your age." And then anytime any of Tom's relatives would come, "You look just like Tom when he was your age." So I would say that I was their love child. That was me. Yeah.
Well, another person who wanted to be here tonight was Richard J. Alexander. A few years ago, the York Theater did a celebration of Tom Jones and Harvey Schmidt when they received the Oscar Hammerstein Award. I was lucky, and Sam, were you there that night?
I was. Yeah.
It was such an incredible evening. Leslie Ann Warren also, who sends her condolences, and that she could not be here tonight. But Richard J. Alexander directed, and he sent a little clip that we're going to share with you right now.
Hello, my name is Richard J. Alexander, and I'm thrilled that Richard Skipper is celebrating Tom Jones. The Tom Jones, not the singer Tom Jones. That was crazy with those obits. Anyway, Jones and Schmidt, legendary. Jones and others, just as equally powerful and potent. I happen to be good friends with Dan Shaheen, who is now taking care of the legacy of Jones and Schmidt. So I feel pretty fortunate. He suggested me to James Morgan at the York Theater to direct the Oscar Hammerstein Award the year they were honored, and it was a pretty damn special night. Harvey, who I'd never met, was so charming. I think I said something to him like, if we had met in the 60s, we would have been dating. And he passed away a couple weeks later. Tom I met when he came to the Old Globe to see a production of I Do, I Do that I directed, starring Paige Davis and Patrick Page, which was really one of the highlights of my life and career. I knew that album backwards from the library growing up in high school with Mary Martin and Robert Preston, and couldn't imagine I would ever touch that piece. So my, crossings with both of them is something that I will always hold close to my heart. And I know that their legacy is so huge that it's going to go on, but I'm sure there are so many people who are going to talk this afternoon and illuminate, and I know Dan Shaheen sent some special things. So Have a wonderful celebration. Richard, you are something else. The way you've been doing this for so long is fantastic, and Tom Jones certainly deserves this, and may he rest in peace.
Dan, by the way, sent all the photographs that were part of the collage that we put together at the beginning. So Dan, thank you. I know that he couldn't be here tonight either. Charles, bring on our next guest.
Yes, for our next guest, I'd love to bring on someone who was in Philemon and the Fantastics off-Broadway, Ken Cantor.
And here he is. Hello,
Hi.
Ken.
Hi, Ken.
Actually, you've cut it a little bit short. I was in Philemon, and after doing Philemon, Tom wanted to hold on to me, and so he put me into the Fantastics. And when the Fantastics was over, I went into Colette Collage and Music Theater Works, and then a couple of years later, I wound up doing Celebration at Musicals in Mufti. And since then, I've done Tempesta and Grover's Corners, a gala that we did at the Merkin Hall. What a name. And so I've done a hell of a lot of their shows.
And who did you play in Colette?
Pardon?
Who did you play in Colette?
Willie.
Love
Willie. It was a wonderful job. You show up for Act 1 and then you're done. It was
the opposite of Dick Latessa when he was in Mirette and he at Goodspeed, and we would hang out all the time, and he would just only do the second act.
Yeah,
he would draw the whole first act, and we'd sit with him. So I got to know Dick so well because he literally didn't come on stage until the second act. It was great as a kid.
As I say, a terrific gig. The memories that I have, I've got a handful of them because I worked with them so often. I think one of my favorites was when I was down at Sullivan Street. I did El Gallo there, and going into it, there was a point at rehearsal where you're supposed to stand on top of a stool and put your arm up around a trim that goes all the way around the auditorium, a kind of plaster trim. And he says, yeah, at this point you put your hand up there. And I put my hand up there, and you could feel an indentation in the plaster where decades of El Gallos had put their hands there. It was an extraordinary thing. But the thing that I remember the most, we had worked all afternoon, and I wanted to watch the show that night. And I was sitting in the auditorium waiting for the show to begin. And a father and son were sitting in front of me. And the son had obviously been primed by his father about what a wonderful show The Fantastics was. And he was just bouncing off the walls with questions before the show started. And at one point, I heard the little boy say, he pointed at the drape that had that famous lettering of The Fantastics on it. And he turned to his father and he said, "What's behind the curtain?" And his father said, "Oh, that's where the magic is." And I thought, has there ever been a better answer to that question? I mean, what an incredibly profound and accurate thing to say. The biggest problem with doing The Fantastics at Sullivan Street was that everything that could conceivably have happened at Sullivan Street doing The Fantastics had already happened. And, you come off stage and go, you know what just happened? And you sort of share, and they go, oh, yeah, I remember 3 years ago. And then they can describe a much more glorious example. Well, we had one experience that was unique, and I was there for it. It was one of those 2-show evenings on the weekend. And the person who was playing the keyboard injured herself between shows, and she couldn't play the second show. And so they called their usual standbys, and no one was available. They even called Norman Weiss, who at that moment was conducting Phantom of the Opera. And so he couldn't do it. He was in the middle of conducting the show. And so Harvey said, if I can fit in there, I'll do it.
I love it.
Because, you had the rear wall of the theater, and you had the piano and the platforms, and the space between the rear wall and the beginning of the piano was preset. You could not move it. And so he said, if I can squeeze in there, I'll play it. And so I did the one performance at Sullivan Street that Harvey played. And the interesting thing about it, I knew that he did not read music. He wrote it brilliantly, but he couldn't read them. And he came in with a loose leaf book to put down on the keyboard. And I was wondering, what the hell could be in that? Because it's not music. I don't know what it is. And so I took a glance at it, and it had, like, say, number 6, Never Say No, or whatever it was. And in that inimitable handwriting of his, it said, "Start on second black key higher than you think." That was it. And they had warned me that if he got lost playing the show, because he was playing it all from memory, if he got lost, he would start banging on the keys with his fists in rhythm, really, until he found where he was, and then he would start playing again. And at a key change in Round and Round, sure enough, he went up and he started banging. And so all tonality went out the window. We started reciting in great drama until he found his place again. But at last I had finally had a unique experience at Sullivan Street that had never happened before. But Michael, I'd like to come in and second your opinion about Philemon. I thought that it was an incredibly gorgeous score, possibly one of the most complicated that I've ever had to learn. And it was a tremendous amount of work, but enormously satisfying. I really enjoyed that score tremendously, still do. Working with those guys was a very unique experience. And no one has mentioned this yet, but Tom could tell a theatrical anecdote better than anyone that I have ever heard. And he told the story about a celebration and everything that led up to the opening night. And I must say that it was an absolutely hysterical story. He apparently, there was enough ice on the ground that Harvey, on his way to the theater at the Ambassador, slipped and broke his leg. And so he was in a wheelchair with his leg extended all the way out in a cast. And they had to carry him up the stairs into the lobby of the theater. And he had to watch the show from his wheelchair. And Tom said that he was running a tech rehearsal. And he was running down the aisle, as he put it, wildly gesticulating about something that had not satisfied him. And as he was gesticulating, his foot caught in one of the seats on the aisle, and he tripped, and he jammed his shoulder. Yes. And they had to put him in some sort of an odd cast that had his arm sticking all the way out like this with an angle piece. And he had to direct the rest of the show, with his arms sticking out like that. While all of this was going on, the producer of the show, Cheryl Crawford, had found that someone working in her office was embezzling money.
Dick Chandler, I remember.
And the co-producer.
She confronted him. And he, apparently having no other alternative, attacked her with a hammer and fractured her skull.
Oh.
And so,
I'll butt in later.
Well, at any rate, Tom was describing what the opening night was. They went to the party, which apparently was at the top of that building at number 1 Times Square. They used to have a restaurant up there. Mm-hmm. And he said that Harvey was there in his wheelchair with his legs sticking up. I had my arm like this sticking out, and Cheryl Crawford showed up. Like he said, it looked like 3 awful people in the spirit of 76. And he said, we started getting some of the reviews and they weren't as pleasing as they wanted them to be. And he said, we would have thrown ourselves off the roof if any of us could have managed it. It was a marvelous story. And he told it with such humility and sense of he was just extraordinary. And as I say, working on him on so many of those shows was quite a revelation for me. quite unique. In that he didn't approach his material like, well, I've written it and now you must present it in the manner in which it deserves to be. It was always a strong collaboration, and he really had time to listen to you and at least pretend to appreciate what things you might be offering in addition to the thoughts that possibly he had about the piece. And it was always a very, very creative experience. And as I say, doing all of those shows of his with him, and sometimes just there, with notes at the end of the performance, was a very, very creative experience. It was a wonderful, wonderful time.
That's wonderful.
And one of the fortunate things was something Harvey once said to me, because I went from playing El Gallo to playing Mr. Rich in Celebration. And after he saw me do Mr. Rich, he said, "You see, Jones and Schmidt write shows for people at every stage of their lives."
That is wonderful. I love this.
Which was awfully handy.
Yes.
Well, we have one guest who's been waiting patiently in the wings. So Charles, bring her on.
Yes, our final guest for tonight did Jones and Schmidt's musical Harold and Maude at the York Theatre and other, I believe, readings and workshops for them. Cass Morgan, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I've been wrapped and listening to your stories. It's been really wonderful and moving and entertaining.
Well, thanks for your patience, and and I'm glad we got you on now finally. And as everyone has talked about their experiences, the collaborative process, working with them, what was your experience as far as the collaboration is concerned?
Collaboratively, well, I mean, I was there kind of after the fact for sure. With Harold and Maude, they had done a reworking of the show, and they had edited it down, and but even still, I believe there was a section early on in the show in the church that was not working for me. I could not make the comedy land, and Tom was so kind, and he was directing. No, he wasn't. Carl Andrus was directing it, but he was there all the time. Tom was there all the time, incredibly attentive, incredibly supportive. And so I just felt like, wow, I suck. I just suck. I can't make this. And Tom was just so, no, that's okay. This doesn't work for you. So we'll just fix it. I don't even remember what he did, but suddenly the scene just played beautifully and I stopped worrying about it. But I do have a unique story, and it's a little embarrassing, but I'll tell it. We're going back many, many decades, and maybe 1967. And I had, as a young, like a 13-year-old, fallen desperately in love with the Fantastics, as so many people that went on to have careers in music theater did. And, just my dream would have been to be in that. Although I was not a lyric soprano, it's not really my, but I've still wanted it. And so I had been working at the Barter Theater. I was 21 years old, and I came back to New York. No training. I was just one of these people who would just say, "Well, I could do that," and maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. But in those days, everybody bought Backstage, the weekly newspaper, and in it were casting calls and all kinds of information about the business. And there was a casting call for the Fantastics, and they were looking for replacements. And since my name is Cassandra, and in the show, Matt sings that her name in the Metaphor, is that the name of the song that's in Fantastic? And I thought, it's destiny. I am meant to have this role. So I wrote them a letter when I enclosed my picture and my bio, which was about, this long at that point. And I said, you really need to see me for this, because my name is Cassandra, and I just know that there's magic in that. And I sent it off, and lo and behold, they did. They called me in, and I just was beside myself. And the story doesn't get too much more interesting than that. I went to the theater. They were so nice. Tom was just beaming the whole time, kind. I'm sure I was not very good, but they were so kind and sweet to me, and I just never forgot it. It made me feel like maybe, you know, there was a possibility that I might have a career someday, but they were so kind to me then. And I never, in the years later when I did work with Tom, I never asked him if he remembered that.
I was going to ask if you were able to relay that story to him.
I never asked him. I was mortified, actually. But anyway, they were so sweet, and he was always so nice to me over the years. And I always felt really supported. And like I said, that story about working on Harold and Maude, which was, I just thought it was such a beautiful show. I loved being part of it. I found it so moving and funny. But he was, you know, just right there all the time, right there to be helpful in any way. So.
Wonderful. Charles?
Yeah.
It was wonderful. Well, I think we're running down to our final moments here, so I'll let Richard decide.
We are running, but I'm going to give each of you a chance to have your final word tonight. I will start, and then I will turn it over to Ken, Michael, Nancy, Cass, Charles, and Sam. You'll have almost the final word, because after you speak, I'm going to play one of my favorite clips, and then we are going to end with Tom. From our interview that we did just last month. It was just a few weeks ago. I never had the good fortune to work with either one of them, but each time that I encountered either one of them, they were just absolute gentlemen in this business, and there aren't too many of those around. Mm-hmm. And they remembered you. That's the thing that they would always remember me by name, and they were just absolutely wonderful. And when I was lucky enough to be good friends with Carol Channing, and when she passed, I was at her memorial, and Tyne Daly spoke, and she read a beautiful poem. I wish that I could remember it, and some of you may even know it, but she said, always think of him as being in the next room, because he simply is. You may not see him physically, but we know that he's there. We know that he's there when we hear his music, when we see his shows, and thank God they will continue to be produced over and over and over again. And that's a great legacy to leave behind. I end all of my shows by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. And Sam, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, but isn't Ken Bloom working on a book about the lyrics of Tom Jones? Or
I think so. That would be Dan would know more details than I would, but that sounds wonderful. I hope so.
Yeah, I think that's in the works. So that's something else we can all look forward to. But as I say at the end of all my shows, go to your Facebook friends list. You're all on Facebook, I think, and go to the 5th name that pops up and reach out with a phone call. Oh. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message, but a phone call. And let that person know the impact that they have made on your life. Oh. I'm glad, Sam, thanks to you, that I got the chance to tell your father the impact that he made on my life. So I thank you all for being here tonight. My closing song that I'm going to play before Tom speaks sums up how I feel about all of you being here tonight, and I think you know which song I'm talking about. But on that note, I'm going to leave the screen, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Ken. And thank you all for being here this evening.
Thank you, Richard. Ken, I think it's your turn to give.
Okay. I would like to add something that might be out of place. I can't tell you how often I worked with Janet Watson and how dear she was, and what a generous choreographer she was. She never made me feel that I was ruining her work. And so many choreographers So many choreographers will barely disguise their disdain. And Janet always treated you with such kindness and sweetness. I always looked forward to working with her. And I do want to mention just her name in passing, because what an extraordinary collaborator she was, and what a great person she was. That's it.
Thank you, Ken. And Cass, I think you'd be next.
All right. I just want to say thank you, Tom, for your gorgeous words and for inspiring me to have a life in the theater. You really did.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And Michael, I think you can.
Well, I just feel like I was fated to know him. I feel like I knew him in past lives. I will know him in future lives. I just loved him. He was a wonderful person. Oh, I owe everything to him. I cannot imagine what my life would have been like without him. Really and truly. That's it. I can't add to that.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. And Nancy?
I just feel very honored to have worked with him and especially to have had him as a friend, and Janet too. And I just want to mention, if you haven't seen the Legacy Project's interview, that I produced it for the Legacy Project of the Dramatists Guild Foundation, Tom and Harvey's. Tom is in New York, and then we went down to Texas and filmed Harvey. And if you haven't seen that, it's on. You can stream it on the internet. Just stream it, because I think it's a wonderful film where they both talk about their work a lot. And I felt so proud to be involved with that, actually, because they were so great to interview. They just gave us such wonderful material.
That is wonderful. It's great. Well, I'll give the second to last final word. I know personally how wonderful it was to be able to interview Tom Jones, and this is what I have to kind of remember him by almost, is his book, Making Musicals. I want to
amazing.
That before we did our interview, I hadn't read the book, and he said that he wanted me to read the book before we did the conversation. So he was kind enough to mail me a signed copy of it. So I have this signature from him.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yes, it is. I'll read it in case people can't see it. It says, "Hi, Charles. I am, so to speak, handing you the drum. See page 188, and I wish you all the best, Tom Jones." And for those who haven't read the book, handing you the drum essentially means encouraging you to go out and make your own kind of work. And that's such a beautiful message from him, I think, that I'd like to end on that.
Okay, well, are you going to leave me alone here, Charles? I don't think I want to end up on this screen by myself. I think you have to stick around. I want to thank, Charles, you and Richard for doing this. It's so wonderful to kind of get to hear new perspectives and just people that, tell stories that I've never heard about someone that obviously meant so much to me. So I'd like to thank you guys and everyone who took time out of their day to come and sort of talk about him and the impact that he had on their lives. And it's really special. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. I mean, it's so wonderful that you could do this. And
it's great. Yeah, I can't wait to see what we have coming up next. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Sometimes in the morning when shadows are deep, I lie here beside you, just watching you sleep. And sometimes I whisper what I'm thinking of. My cup runneth over wind. Sometimes in the evening, when you do not see, I study the small things you do constantly. I memorize moments that I'm fondest of. My cup runneth over wind. Love runneth over wind long. My cup runneth over wind long.
Mentioned about Sam Jones, my son, one of my sons, when he was 3.5 years old. He we did our first tour of the Fantastics in Japan, and we rehearsed in New York and did a run through. And he was the only person in the audience in the theater. And when it was over, he was sitting like this. And I said, "Sam, what's the matter?" And he said, "I'm worried about Act Two." And I said, "So am I, Sam." And then last, I know he's going to do music. This is the last song that Harvey and I will have written together. A tune that Harvey wrote that's beautiful. We always wanted to find a lyric, never could, but finally I did after Harvey passed away. So it's real short, and it's a beautiful melody, but I can't sing. So anyway, it goes like this. Don't look for me here, not here by this marker. Don't look for me here, not under this mound. Just open your eyes and look all around you. Just open your heart and I will be found. That bird in the sky that flies by you singing, that soft summer breeze that trembles the trees, those cold winter nights when stars start to sparkle, they're all part of me, and I'm part of these. That laughter you share, I'm part of that laughter. Those tears that you shed, I'm part of them too. Bum, 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 bum. Don't look for me here, not here in this graveyard. How can I be dead when I'm part of you? I'm part of you.